The movie that I chose for this week's assignment is The Kids Are All Right. The movie focuses on a family with a lesbian couple, Nick and Jules, and their two children, Laser, who is 15, and Joni, who just recently turned 18. In the beginning of the movie, Laser is trying to convince his sister to contact the sperm bank and find out who the biological father is. They were both born for the same sperm donor, even though Nick had one of the children and Jules had the other. So they are half siblings, and Laser is curious to know who the father is and wants Joni to feel the same way. And she kind of hesitantly contacts him. She's not really sure, but she loves her brother and she wants to do what he needs. So they meet him. And what was interesting was that after the meeting, Joni surprisingly wanted more. She wanted to know him, spend more time with him, and find out more about him. Where Laser, who's the one who really wanted the meeting, was just kind of good. He said, "No, he's okay, but I'm fine." Um, so it was just sort of an interesting turn in the way that it started to what it was like after they met him. In the meantime, Laser's friend Clay comes over, and Clay's kind of a bad influence and convinces Laser to go through their mom's stuff, and they find a porn video. It's actually male gay porn that they're watching together, and Nick and Jules catch them. And so, in the questioning process, because Nick and Jules think that maybe Laser is gay and that he just hasn't told them, and that maybe him and his friend are having a relationship, they start questioning him and saying, we care for you, we love you either way. Is there anything you want to tell us? And um, Laser's not gay, and so he ends up in that process admitting to the fact that him and Joni had actually met with Paul, their biological father. So Nick and Jules are understandably upset. They feel a little bit betrayed, but rather than saying that the kids can't ever see him again, they say, you know what, nothing else is happening until we meet this guy. So they set up a meeting and they all meet him, and it goes a little bit better for Jules maybe than for Nick. I think Nick feels a bit threatened and a little jealous that maybe the kids don't feel like her and Jules are enough anymore, and that they're reaching out to find that father figure in their life, which I think that she kind of felt like she was. So through the meeting, Paul actually ends up hiring Jules to do some landscaping work at his house. So she's at his house doing some landscaping, and the sexual tension starts to build a little bit, and they end up kissing. And she comes back day after day, and it happens more and more, and it's kind of surprising and shocking due to the fact that she's a lesbian and just kind of the situation. Paul should kind of know better, and he should be more mature than that. But he's portrayed with some women and maybe not being the most mature man despite his age in the movie. So things sort of progress, and they continue to have this relationship, and they end up sleeping together repeatedly. And Jules realizes it's wrong. She says, we have to stop this. This isn't working. This isn't right. But she can't stop. The urge is just there for her. So eventually, Nick realizes, maybe he's not so bad. Let's give him another chance. And so they all get together for dinner at Paul's house. And Nick realizes, he is okay. And they sort of bond over Joni Mitchell, and they start singing together. And Nick's kind of in a really good place. And she goes to the bathroom and finds Jules's hair on the brush and in the drain. And then she goes into the bedroom and finds something of Jules's next to the bed. And she sort of realizes what's going on. So later that night, they get home, and she confronts Jules about it and says, I found your stuff. How long has this been happening? And the kids overhear the argument. And so they also find out what's happening. And they're all very upset. Um, Jules is upset because she wasn't feeling valued, and she doesn't know what happened. And the kids are upset because their mom is having an affair with their biological father, a sperm donor. And Nick is obviously upset because Jules was cheating on her with Paul. And so this fight kind of is a turning point in the movie where everything kind of went from being okay and there's tension to now everybody's upset with everybody, and it got kind of uncomfortable, and it just really, really tense. And so Jules is sleeping on the couch, and Nick's upset, and the kids are mad, and they kind of shut Paul out of their life, and Paul tries to apologize, but nobody wants to hear from him. And Paul even calls Jules and says, leave Nick, bring the kids, move in with me, and we'll start a family. And Jules is sort of surprised by this and says, no, I can't do that. I'm a lesbian. I love Nick, and we can't be a family. And it couldn't work out like that. So there's just a lot of tension, a lot of things that happen, and in the end, Jules ends up making this speech the night before Joni's about to leave for college, and kind of talks about how marriage is hard and there's ups and downs, and you're with the same person forever, and sometimes you make stupid choices and mistakes that are hurtful to the other person, and marriage is about overcoming those things. And things are still a little weird, and Nick is crying, and they drop Joni off at college in that last scene, and Joni's kind of okay, and I think they're a little surprised. And on the way home, Laser's kind of okay and makes some comments that make you feel like he's happy with his life. And you're led to believe that Nick and Jules end up happy together, and they move past the situation, and Paul's kind of out of their lives. So throughout the movie, some of the issues and the outside influences that the family faces were the influence of friends. Clay was Laser's friend, who was a terrible influence. And in the beginning, they show Laser doing drugs with Clay, and you're kind of led to not like him and see that he's a bad influence. And Jules and Nick tell Laser that he's a bad influence, but he doesn't really listen. Another thing is the friends of Joni. She plays Scrabble with them a lot. She hangs out with them. They show her a few times, and one of her friends is very sexual and kind of talks about things that make Joni feel uncomfortable. And her friend calls her uptight, and that's really upsetting to her. And so she has some of those pressures from her friends. Another influence or outside issue is that they have a biological father that they haven't met, and they're curious. Children are curious. They want to know him. They want to know what his situation is, what his story is, and kind of where they come from. Throughout the movie, Nick is a doctor, and you can tell that she's really stressed out, and she's drinks a little bit because of her job and maybe some of the pressure she's dealing with in life. And so that's another thing that the family's kind of dealing with. And it's not the main focus of the movie, but it's definitely something that's addressed. And it's an issue that the family's dealing with. And Jules kind of makes comments, and it makes people feel a little bit uncomfortable. Another issue is that Jules doesn't really feel appreciated in the movie. You can tell that Nick sort of doesn't believe in her business and landscaping, and she keeps making comments like, why did you buy a truck? You don't have any clients. And Jules says things like, well, I need the truck to get clients. And it's just kind of an interesting relationship because you can really tell that Nick is the main breadwinner, and Jules is just sort of secondary. And then obviously the biggest issue is that once Paul comes into their life, dealing with the affair that's happening. And that's really what a lot of the movie sort of culminates at, that point when the affair is happening and what's happening, with the children when they find out, and will the couple be able to make it through, what's going to happen to Paul. And so that's one of the biggest things I felt the family was dealing with. The way the family dealt with the influences was kind of interesting. I mean, there was a lot of anger. There was a lot of denial, I think, of the problems that were happening. I think Nick knew all along that something wasn't right, and that, Jules maybe wasn't feeling appreciated, but it took until that affair for maybe Nick to see that this is serious, and maybe for Jules to realize that she's worth something. Nick, I think, uses drinking a little bit as a way to deal with influences and deal with things in her life, and there comes a point in the movie where actually Joni does the same thing. She is very upset after she finds out about the affair, and she goes to a party and gets really drunk and feels like, maybe she is a little too uptight, and she starts to go hang out with her friend and starts making out with him, and he actually asks her, like, are you okay? And she realizes she's not, and she leaves. And Nick is sort of the protector of the family. So the family roles are interesting in this lesbian relationship. There's no father and mother. They're both mothers. But Nick is sort of the more dominant one. She seems to be the decision maker, the defender, and her biological daughter, Joni, is a little bit more responsible as well. Jules is a little more free-spirited, kind of the cooler parent, maybe. And Laser is her biological child, and he's kind of the same way as well. Another family role that sort of comes into play in the movie is the father figure, and that's Paul. And he comes in, and he wants to be a father figure, but he doesn't quite know how to do that. So it's just kind of interesting. Family decisions seem to be made mostly by Nick. She seems to have the final say, even though, everybody talks about things and there's conversations. But throughout the movie, it sort of seemed like the family kind of did what they want secretly, regardless of what the discussion was. And there was a lot of lying and things like that were happening. So along those lines, scriptural teachings, the family didn't really have a lot of things that agreed with scripture. I felt like there was a lot of sex, there was porn, there was drugs. I mean, just the fact that the main couple in the movie were lesbians, that obviously goes against scripture. Marriage is to be between a man and a woman, and their children are miracles. And they raised these children, and they wanted these children, and they birthed these children, but they did it unnaturally, and it goes against scripture. But then at the same time, it kind of agrees with scripture in the way that they raise their children with unconditional love and acceptance and supporting them and doing everything that they need. So it's a very non-traditional family, and it definitely doesn't look like what scripture would agree with on the surface, but I think at its core it kind of does. Throughout the movie, there's a lot of lying, a lot of swearing, drugs, like I mentioned. Laser's caught doing drugs in the beginning of the movie. And then on the other side, marriage. Jules talks about marriage being, you know, difficult, it's hard, it's got its ups and downs, and I think that that does go with scripture. And even though it's maybe not the way scripture intended, it's, between two women, it really does talk about, being with somebody in the good times and the bad. And so I think it can go either way depending on which part you're looking at. The way the family resolves the issues in the movie is they kind of don't. They sort of push Paul away, and I guess that kind of resolves things, and Joni sort of accepts what's happening and she leaves, and Laser sort of realizes that maybe that father figure wasn't what he wanted in his life, and his father um, was kind of a bad person, and so he's sort of good. He realizes that he had it good, and Jules' speech really kind of encompasses the whole story, and they all sort of realize, they appreciate each other. The family doesn't really have a lot of resources and tools. One of the common themes I noticed was that the kitchen and food and cooking sort of brought everyone together, and that's when they had their conversations. In the beginning, they showed the family having dinner together at the dinner table, which Joni receives a phone call, and she gets yelled at because that time is sacred for the family, and I think that shows some good family values. The family also bonds over music and games. Jules is shown playing ping pong with Laser, and Joni is shown playing Scrabble with Nick, and Joni's also shown playing Scrabble with her friends. So they have things that keep them together, and they talk about things, and even tough stuff when things are less tense. But once things started to get tense, it seemed to be a little bit more lying and not really dealing with things. So the family maybe needed to find other ways to handle that. For this family, I think things were resolved in a pretty successful manner. It's a little bit weird that Paul just sort of disappeared. They don't really address what happens to him. Everyone kind of just shuts him out, even though he's trying to work his way back in, and he kind of realizes that he did want a family all along. Jules didn't feel appreciated, and I think that even though the affair was the wrong way to get that attention, she was able to get that attention, and Nick realized that maybe she was neglecting the relationship a little bit. Clay's friendship was a terrible friendship for Laser, and Paul pointed that out, and even though the moms had been telling Laser the whole time, when Paul said something, I think something sort of clicked with Laser, and he was like, yeah, he is kind of a bad person, and you don't really hear from him anymore. And I think one of the other things that the family faced here was that Laser really wanted that father figure, and everything sort of broke down when he got it. And after everything was resolved and everything kind of settled at the end, Laser realized that things were kind of not so bad. After Joni's dropped off at school, she seems pretty good. She seems happy. They hug her goodbye. And Laser's in the back seat on the way home, and he says to Nick and Jules, I don't think you guys should break up. And they say, oh, why is that? And he says, I think you're too old, and it sort of breaks the tension. And Jules puts her hand on Nick's leg, and Nick grabs her hand and squeezes it, and that's what leads you to believe that, everything is going to be okay, and this family is going to be fine. One thing I thought that was super interesting about the movie was that the main thing was not that the family was made with two lesbians. That wasn't the biggest issue, and I think that this movie could have very easily been made with Nick being a male character. There was just a few things, a few references that maybe wouldn't have worked, but the main issues in the movie, I think, could have taken place either way, with a male character or a female character. Nick would have still been the breadwinner, a little bit controlling and jealous, um, and the affair could have still happened. But that extra layer of having the lesbians in the movie was definitely something that didn't have to be there, but it made the movie a little bit more interesting, I think. Overall, I think I would really recommend this movie. It was unexpected. I definitely didn't see some of the twists and turns that were coming, but I really did like it. I think it brought up some really interesting things and things that families deal with. As a teacher, which you can see behind me, I deal with students that have very, very different lives, and it's definitely not my place to judge. I mean, how fair would it be for me to say to a student that walks into my classroom, hey, I would love to help you learn math, but you have two moms and I don't agree with that, so sorry. Um, it's not my job to judge, it's my job to support you, and it's my job to, take what's given and take what's out there and help these children and help families. So I work with families in my job, and I might not agree with every family that's out there, but it's my job to help those families and to help the children and teach the children. So I think this movie is really good for anybody who works with families or people to see, because it brings up some very interesting things. Regardless of there being a lesbian relationship in this movie, affairs happen. Children are born via artificial insemination. They want to know their father, whether it's a sperm donor or just someone who's not in their life. They're curious, and sometimes relationships that begin bring really good things, great relationships for the children, and sometimes everything can fall down and break apart around you. So the movie overall, yeah, I would recommend it. I think it's an important topic for people to know about. It's kind of hard to watch. There were times that I couldn't believe what I was seeing, and it was difficult to watch some of the things this family was going through. But overall, it was a very good film. So if you do take the time to watch it, I hope you enjoy it and get some things out of it like I did. Thank you.